It's Ellison Barber in for Gadi, Schwartz. Tonight, the DOGE drama continues with President Trump talking about that email blast, telling federal workers to list what they did last week.
Yeah, well, it's somewhat voluntary, but it's also if you don't answer, I guess you get fired.
That as more than 20 staffers at DOGE resign. We'll have the latest from the White House. And one of the agencies impacted by those DOGE cuts is the IRS. We'll talk to one worker who was terminated and backed Trump in the election, how he feels about the government cutbacks. Plus, farmers are getting iced out, not by cold temperatures, a federal funding freeze. The move that's preventing farmers from receiving hundreds of thousands in grants needed to grow their businesses. Those are all just some of the stories we're following, and there is a lot more to unpack tonight. So let's get started, because this is Stay Tuned Now. The DOGE-induced chaos continues. Millions of jobs hang in the balance as President Trump and Elon Musk continue to make sweeping cuts to the federal workforce. Today, some of those impacted workers protested on Capitol Hill. Take a listen to what some of them had to say.
I don't even have the vocabulary anymore to describe how devastating it is to not only see our jobs going away. Like, this is not about me and my job. This is about what America is in the world.
We've never had an issue with our performance, and we're doing work for the American public. We're here for safety, and we're patriots. We love our country. That's why we're taking these jobs.
Meanwhile, 21 civil service staffers who seemingly could have kept their jobs at the federal level are voluntarily calling it quits, writing this in a joint resignation letter, quote, "We will not use our skills as technologists to compromise core government systems, jeopardize American sensitive data, or dismantle critical public services. We will not lend our expertise to carry out or legitimize DOGE's actions." Joining us now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake. Garrett, let's start with that email, the one that has gotten so much talk in recent days, a lot of confusion, right? People told to justify their jobs or risk being fired. The White House press secretary saying she has done it. Where do things stand right now? What do you think is most important for people to know about what has been said, what hasn't been said, and where we go from here?
Well, I asked the president about this in the Oval Office today, Ellison, and it's pretty clear that he still expects federal employees, of which the White House says already 1 million have already responded, to write back to this email, although it is very much, at least in his view, a proof of life check to make sure that people are responding at all. Only if you don't respond, you could begin a process with your management that could result in your termination. Here's part of his answer to me about this, which I'm not entirely sure sheds a lot of light on exactly what's happening here.
What it is do people exist? We have this massive government with millions of people, and nobody knows who's working for the government, who's not. I could tell you 5 things I did last week. I could tell you 5 things I did 6 weeks ago, right?
Ellison, the one part of this question that I don't think has been really substantively answered, included by the president, is what's going to happen with this information that the government gets from those responses and where it all goes. The president was not clear on that point today.
Garrett, and I also understand, based on NBC News' reporting, that these emails ultimately are going to be fed into some sort of artificial intelligence system. What do we know there?
Yeah, look, this is part of where our reporting has led us, although when the press secretary was asked about it today, she seemed to be caught unaware of this possibility. Our reporting at NBC News has been that the text of these emails, and it's notable that the White House has asked them to be text, not attachments of any kind, will be fed into what's called a large language model AI, which can then essentially review the information and presumably help make decisions about which employees are critical and which are necessary to keep the government functioning. As you'll note, that runs kind of counter to what the president told me. If this is just a matter of proving that you still exist and work for the government, presumably your 5 things email and an AI is not going to be enough to decide whether you're still important to the federal government. I think there's clearly a lot more reporting we have to do on this topic, which has so deeply shaken the federal workforce.
Yeah, I mean, Garrett, have we heard anything else from lawmakers on Capitol Hill, Republicans in particular, about if they still support this or if they're wavering now?
Yeah, look, Republicans are kind of the dog that caught the car when it comes to this whole cost-cutting movement from DOGE. They have long preached the importance of cutting the federal bureaucracy, shrinking government. But many, though not all, are starting to complain a little bit about how it's being done, suggesting that not enough care is being taken for the people who make up the federal government. Listen to two very influential senators who our team caught up with today.
I think that any process you undergo where you're trying to find efficiencies, and if that involves some reductions in force, it needs to be done in a respectful way.
There's a right way and a wrong way when you're dealing with layoffs, with terminations, and I think what I'm hearing is that the federal employees have been treated with a level of disregard to their service and to their tenure.
Murkowski is about as close to an independent senator as there is in the Republican Party, but John Thune is notable here because, of course, he's the Senate Republican leader, and so his very careful distancing himself from the manner in which these cuts have been conducted is noteworthy, although I've not seen any indication from him or anyone else in Republican congressional leadership that they're ready to really significantly push back against the president or Musk on the work that's being done by DOGE. Ellison?
All right, NBC's Garrett Haake at the White House. Thank you. Meanwhile, we are about a month away from spring. That means flowers, they'll be blooming, birds probably chirping, and your taxes, those will be due. As I'm sure you know, tax season can be chaotic any year, but this year it could be more chaotic than ever because the IRS is one of the federal agencies targeted by DOGE. So will all of this government instability impact your tax return? NBC's Vaughn Hilliard joins us now with more. Vaughn, walk us through where things stand right now. I mean, between layoffs, Donald Trump, Elon Musk going back and forth, talking about that email. I mean, where do things stand as it relates to the IRS? What should people worried about this? What do they need to know right now?
Right. There is a lot of confusion as to what the future of the Internal Revenue Service is. And, you know, I've been talking to IRS employees out in Ogden, Utah, which is one of the main IRS hubs. And there's a lot of questions over the future of their own employment. Already, thousands of probationary officers or probationary agents and other staffers at the IRS have been either terminated or placed on administrative leave in the middle of tax season. There's potentially more reductions on the way. And President Trump has suggested that he wants to abolish the IRS. An advisor to the president in the White House has suggested that even more terminations are on the way. So there is just a lot here at play. Today, we should be clear, Ellison, the acting commissioner at the IRS just stepped down and was replaced. And so there is a lot of confusion as exactly where the IRS is going in the months and years ahead. But for the moment, it is still very much existing, and folks are still getting notes that they're going to have to ultimately comply.
So in terms of what the average person should do, Vaughn, has the White House or any of your sources said anything about what this could mean for tax returns if people are supposed to get checks? I mean, presumably, based on what you've just been reporting there, people should still file their taxes as they normally would, right?
Right. It's made clear that under federal statute that Americans still must comply with the federal tax laws. And that even if in the situation if the IRS were to be abolished, that federal congressional statutes still apply and still exist. So everybody should still file their taxes accordingly. And that is where, you know, amid all of this here, there is some concern that potentially Americans will question this process, much kind of like what happened during the pandemic back in 2020. But all of the same filing deadlines still apply and the requirements still stand, despite whatever DOGE does to the IRS or its workforce and its leadership structure. Federal tax laws still apply.
And Vaughn, before I let you go, I do want to ask you about some of your reporting earlier in the day in terms of President Trump talking about Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visiting Washington, D.C. and the White House this week. There's been talk about a possible deal as it relates to minerals. Where do things stand right now?
Right. For all of the domestic action happening, there are still negotiations, big negotiations taking place in real time between Russia, Ukraine, the United States, and the EU. And President Trump just this afternoon in the Oval Office suggested that President Zelensky of Ukraine will be making his way to Washington, potentially coming to the White House this very Friday. There is a rare earth minerals deal that could be very important to an ultimate peace agreement that is in the mix. We are still working on confirming that President Zelensky and President Trump intend to sign that agreement between the two countries. This is an agreement that has faced quite a bit of backlash, including some concern, particularly from Europe, as President Trump has suggested that in exchange for guaranteeing future security and defense support for Ukraine from further Russian aggression, that in exchange the United States wants hundreds of billions of dollars in rare earth minerals that are on Ukrainian land. And there is the potential that Ukraine will sign off on a deal to some extent on this as a means of ensuring that if the U.S. has a financial stake in the resources on their land, that it would be in the U.S. interest to protect them in the future, because we have not heard from President Trump suggesting that the U.S. intends to back Ukraine joining NATO or even ultimately taking back all of the land that Russia has seized at this point in time. So negotiations are still tense, but this initial agreement on the rare earth minerals and President Zelensky's trip to the U.S. could be a starting point for ultimately all of these sides to come together toward a peace deal.
Yeah, a lot to watch there. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, my friend.
Let's spend a little bit more time talking about those massive changes to the federal workforce and all that's happening with DOGE. Joining us now is Robert McCabe. He is an IRS employee who supported President Trump in the election and has since lost his job. Robert, NBC News has a copy of your termination letter. I know you are dealing with a lot right now, so I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. But could you just walk me through what happened to your job, how you got this letter, and what you were told or not told when it all went down?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, the story is really of what we weren't told all day. We got into the office. Everybody on my team were all pretty much probationary employees as well, aside from the three other members of the team that were really, being our support staff and like training us up. So we all got into the office around 7 o'clock. We did have to report every day. So we turned our computers on, and that's when we started realizing that we didn't have access to systems, so we all kind of left our cubicles and went to our manager, what's going on? Why can't we access our basic systems? And then we got word that there was an ordered work stoppage for everything in the IRS that day. So all examinations were halted, and we just kind of sat around and waited for our fate. The email came through, I'd say around like 11:30. And then we waited around for another hour and a half or so to turn in our equipment, and then we were escorted out of the building.
And how did you and do you feel about those cuts? Did you think that your colleagues and your job, those were wasteful or engaging in any sort of fraud that needed to be, quote unquote, rooted out of the federal government?
No, I wouldn't say that we were a wasteful unit. We recovered a lot of discrepant money. Even in the very short time that we were there, we certainly justified our salaries. That's not to say I didn't see waste when I was working there, but I wouldn't place that necessarily on the people. It's the processes, the workflows, some of the archaic systems that we had to cross-reference that didn't communicate with each other. Those were the inefficiencies, not the people who were there just trying to do a job. We just wanted to go in and do our job every day and, not really have to worry about this kind of stuff. we shouldn't really have to be dealing with politics, in our position.
You know, President Trump, when he was on the campaign trail, and I went back today to check his campaign platform and those 20 points that they had outlined at the time for the Trump-Vance ticket, and his campaign platform did talk about making some cuts and eliminating what they described as burdensome regulations. But that was in particular, in that reference, tied to electric cars. They also talked about his desire to end the quote-unquote weaponization of the government against the American people. But President Trump did not campaign on making cuts to the federal government at this scale. Project 2025, which he distanced himself from during the campaign, that did call for making cuts like this. I'm curious, when you look back on your vote for President Trump, do you feel like he lied to you in this instance? Do you regret voting for him? I mean, where do you fall on looking back? Do you feel like this is what you voted for?
I mean, I didn't vote for a king. I voted for a president that, would operate under constitutional checks and balances. I mean, what he's doing, if I was laid off through a reasonable reduction in force process, I wouldn't be as upset about it. It's just the fact, of how it was done. I never even had a performance review. I wasn't even there long enough to get my first performance review. So for me to be terminated based on performance is illegal. He had no right to do it. Congress passed a budget that justified my position. I worked for the American people. I get that the American people are not fans of the IRS. No one likes to get those notifications from us. But we do serve a real purpose. I mean, we're funding your government. If you like driving on roads and, flying to your next vacation spot, you're going to rely on some government employees to do it.
So very quickly, I mean, are you hoping, Robert, that you see some sort of shifts in the administration? Or if you could do it again, would you vote for someone other than this current administration?
The funny thing about voting is we only have two choices, and you may not agree with the person that you're voting for on 100% of the things that they say. But unfortunately, you're stuck in a binary decision. What I hope to see this administration do is just realize that there's a human element to what they're doing. There are people behind these decisions. And to mock us with SpongeBob memes and chainsaws is disgusting. So I don't know how else to put that. I just hope that the administration realizes what they're doing, and if they continue to take this path, at least do it with a little bit more compassion than they're doing right now.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and helping us and our viewers put a face and a story with these numbers as we're all trying to make sense of the rapidly changing situation there in Washington, D.C. Robert McCabe, thank you so much. We appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
The Department of Agriculture, USDA, is among the federal agencies dealing with funding freezes and job cuts, and some say it is forcing farmers to scramble and try to figure out backup plans. That funding helped with things like farm improvements, new equipment, investments in disaster prep and energy efficiency, but now it is all in limbo. NBC's Shaquille Brewster has more.
Hi there, Ellison. Well, we've been covering a lot the funding freezes at the federal government level. But if you look on social media, you're seeing increasing amount of farmers who now say that they're concerned about the impact of these freezes. We wanted to dig into that a little bit and hear what the federal government is now saying.
As the snow melts across American farmland, America's farmers dealing with a different kind of freeze, a freeze on federal funding.
I'm a fifth-generation farmer.
Rodney Cook is proud to grow corn, soybeans, and alfalfa outside of Sioux Falls, but he tells NBC affiliate Dakota News Now that he's worried delays in federal funds for conservation programs could stop progress farmers have made.
We got to have healthy soil, which creates healthy crops. which creates healthy animals and healthy people.
On his first day in office, President Trump issued an executive order halting all federal payments connected to the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, including nearly $20 billion for conservation programs run by the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
A lot of these funding things have already been contracted, so we're talking about breaching and breaking contracts, breaking promises that have already been made.
The pause had broad implications across rural America, with many farmers just weeks away from the critical planting season. In Minnesota, a sunflower farmer and processor telling state lawmakers he isn't sure he can count on the nearly $500,000 federal reimbursement he was banking on for a huge production expansion already underway.
Our portion will be right around $250,000 out of our pocket.
NBC affiliate CARE reporting the ripple effects could impact businesses that count on the farms like this local cereal maker.
We want to contract with more farmers to grow more sunflowers.
In Maine, a nonprofit farm that supports sustainable practices is still waiting on $300,000, the latest disbursement of promised federal grant money that could lead to misled opportunities for other farmers around the country.
To benefit from a program that really is designed to help them build resilience.
And in Massachusetts, beekeeper Ange Roll was planning to use a $30,000 grant to install deer-proof fencing and an irrigation system for a newly planted orchard.
This isn't just like I fill out a form and I get some money. It's really a highly competitive process. And to do all of that labor and invest all of that time and then to have that rug pulled out from under you is totally destabilizing.
Little by little, May gets sent out with the USDA last week saying it would release a first tranche of pause funding, $20 million.
But $20 million is not a lot of money in that context of just how much we're talking about being disrupted in this situation.
The government partly blaming misallocated funds, with Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins generally stating it is clear that some of this funding went to programs that had nothing to do with agriculture. That is why we are still reviewing. We will honor our commitments to American farmers and ranchers. We reached out to the USDA about some of the specific farms and processors mentioned in this piece, and were told that portions of programs funded by other legislation, the Farm Bill, have not been paused, and that the Secretary continues to evaluate other paused funding. It's an added hardship for farmers already worried about bird flu, the threat of tariffs, and a potential trade war looming with Mexico, Canada, and China. Farmers on the ground like Cook in South Dakota hoping for solutions.
We got to find a way to survive and thrive and evolve and continue. We got no other choice.
And Ellison, you heard us reference the Farm Bill at the end of that piece, and experts say that's just another source of uncertainty for many of these farmers. It's that massive piece of legislation that usually passes every 5 years or so, and it's set to expire at the end of September. And for Republicans, they usually support it looking at the direct assistance, hundreds of billions of dollars that go to farmers. For Democrats, they prioritize the nutrition programs, the food stamps, and that program that's contained in that legislation. But Republicans in Congress are saying that they're looking to cut back on some of those programs that Democrats prioritize that can break that bipartisan coalition that's usually required to fund this program. The bottom line is you have farmers across the country looking at what's happening in Washington, D.C. and becoming more and more anxious for many different reasons. Ellison?
Shaq Brewster, thank you. Now to an aviation scare at Chicago's Midway Airport today. A Southwest plane beginning its descent onto the runway when a private jet crosses in the path of where it's going to land. NBC's Aaron McLaughlin has more on that close call.
Tonight at Chicago's Midway International Airport, an investigation after yet another stunningly close call. The video captured on an airport webcam shows Southwest Flight 2504 nearly touching down. The same moment a private jet crosses the runway. The flight abruptly pulls up, averting potential disaster.
Southwest 2504 going around.
It was surreal. Passengers Emily Novak and Kaylee Mask were on board the Southwest flight from Omaha. What went through your mind when you saw the video?
Shock.
Yeah.
Because we were so oblivious to what was happening because the pilot was so calm and he acted like it was just an everyday thing.
The FAA says the Flexjet private jet entered the runway without authorization. Flexjet released a statement saying it's investigating and adheres to the highest safety standards. Meanwhile, Southwest says its crew followed safety procedures, circled the airport, and landed safely. It's the latest in a string of air disasters and mishaps. From the midair collision that killed 67 near Reagan National Airport to the air disaster in Philadelphia, a crash landing in Toronto, and most recently, an emergency landing after a cabin filled with haze over Atlanta.
The circumstances have been quite different in each one of these accidents or incidents, so it's still too early to draw a common thread through all of them.
All of it rattling travelers nationwide.
From a consumer confidence standpoint, are we nearing a tipping point?
No, I don't think we're nearing a tipping point, but aviation is still incredibly safe, and hopefully this is not the beginning of some long-term trend.
All right, our thanks to Aaron McLaughlin for that report. Now let's talk about some of the other headlines our team is watching tonight. Opening statements kicked off today in the trial for a 73-year-old accused of murdering a Palestinian-American boy in what prosecutors have described as a hate crime. Joseph Kuzba allegedly killed 6-year-old Wadi Al-Fayumi in 2023. Prosecutors say the suspect attacked Wadi's mother and then stabbed the young boy 26 times. Authorities say the family was targeted because of their Islamic faith and as a response to the Israel-Hamas war. This week, jurors are expected to hear emotional 911 audio and see police video from that day. One of the founding members of DOGE, Vivek Ramaswamy, has said he is officially running for governor of Ohio. Just hours after his press conference, both President Trump and Elon Musk endorsed him. He says principles of efficiency, budget cuts, and slashing regulations will be key parts of his campaign platform. An inmate was pulled from death row in Oklahoma. Richard Glossip maintained his innocence for about 30 years after he was convicted of hiring a hitman to murder his boss back in 1997. The Supreme Court stepping in today and granting him a new trial, saying a key witness lied in court and prosecutors withheld information. Meanwhile, the lottery in Texas just got a lot less lucky. The state is looking into 2 big jackpots where the winning tickets were bought using a courier service. Now, the online service is banned in Texas altogether, and any retailer caught working with a courier will have their license revoked. A bunch of milkshakes have been recalled over a possible link to listeria. So far, 12 people have died, dozens hospitalized due to the outbreak. The food service company Lions Magnus says they have voluntarily recalled all 4-ounce packs of Lions Ready Care. And Cisco Imperial Brands frozen supplemental shakes, they say those are recalled as well. The FDA says the outbreak could date back to 2018, but they're still investigating exactly how and where the infections began. You can find more information on NBCnews.com. Don't go anywhere because we are just getting started. Up next, more alarms about that Texas measles outbreak. Newly reported cases skyrocketing, the factors fueling the spread. And later, a perfect 10 for Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin. We'll take you inside the successful launch and look at what's next for the space tourism industry. Stay tuned. Measles cases are on the rise across the United States right now. And of course, most of us probably don't want to take that miracle black sludge Nanny McPhee had. So listen up here, because so far this year, there have been reported cases in at least 8 states, with the biggest outbreak seemingly in the state of Texas. Texas reporting at least 124 cases as of today. A majority of those cases, kids under the age of 18. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel joins us now with more on this. Dr. Patel, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about the outbreak and what parents and even kids need to know here. So there is a vaccine for measles that has been available for quite a while now, at least most of my life. So walk us through what is behind this latest surge.
Yeah, Allison, what's behind this latest surge is unfortunately the rates of unvaccinated children are increasing, and particularly in communities like the one in West Texas, where there's an incredibly high degree, almost 20% of the children in school ages were exempt for different reasons. And so that's just enough to create kind of an opportunity for this highly infectious virus to really spread and spread fast.
So we played that clip from Nanny McPhee there saying that she could tell the kids had measles because of chalky faces, livid spots and a temperature over, I think she said 500 degrees. But that crazy high number aside, are those, generally speaking, the dots, the coloring of the skin, a high temperature, are those symptoms that parents should be looking out for if their child is not vaccinated and maybe came into contact somehow with the measles virus?
Yeah, Ellison, great question. It can be. So that's kind of the most classic, like, very dramatic, obviously, the high fever and that rash. But I'll tell you, I've seen cases of measles, mostly in other countries before, and they don't always present that way. So what I would suggest is that, first of all, just get a handle on whether or not you or your child or your loved ones were vaccinated, yes or no. If they weren't vaccinated, it's not too late to get a vaccine, even if you think you've been exposed to the measles. And then once symptoms start, even if you think, well, this could be a mild cold, I'm not sure, if you're in one of these areas that we mentioned, one of the states, or you have a known contact, you may have been contacted by a public health department and asked if you were in a region where there are known cases. If something is off, present yourself to your local doctor, because even though we haven't seen measles, and I would not necessarily recognize it unless it walks in very dramatically like Nanny McPhee had, we're still now on a high alert just because of the number of cases around the country.
For parents who are maybe thinking about, should I vaccinate my children for measles, could you remind us what happened in the past when we did see a large number of cases of measles or even mumps and rubella? Because I remember being in college, volunteering and working at a school for the deaf and blind in the state of South Carolina, and my teacher said she had lost her hearing because it was pre the vaccine. She said I'd had a bad case of measles, and that was how I lost my hearing. But I think a lot of us forget about those possibilities because most of us have grown up in spaces where the majority of people around us are vaccinated.
Yeah, that's right. And before 1957, that's exactly what you heard, is that most people had immunity because they had infections. And then kind of after 1957, and especially in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on, we have introduced measles vaccines. Most people have had either one or two shots. So if you're a parent or you're just not, if you can't remember, let's say you had all of your vaccination records unfortunately lost to fire or just don't have any of those with you, if you were born anytime after 1957, it's highly likely that you did get at least one shot. But if you can't remember, it doesn't hurt to go ahead and get a shot. One shot, Ellison, can give you up to 95% protection, 95% effectiveness, which is incredible. That second shot gives you 97. So just get vaccinated and try to be on alert, especially in these areas.
Dr. Kavita Patel, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, community town halls descending into utter chaos.
You out now! You out now! Let's go! This man is assaulting me!
A woman dragged out of a public meeting after speaking out. What prompted that shocking situation? But first, you gotta see this. A man in Cartagena, Colombia, tried to board a flight to Amsterdam with a little extra baggage. Colombian authorities stopped the man and those luscious locks for further inspection. But when they cut off his toupee, you can kind of see it there. That's 19 bags of cocaine hidden underneath it. The suspect was later charged with trafficking and making a narcotic substance. Sounds like a hairy situation. We'll be right back. As more federal workers lose their jobs, people across the country are taking their concerns and frustrations about Elon Musk and DOGE directly to their representatives. It's becoming a growing trend as town halls coast to coast fill up with people demanding answers and protesting changes being made by the Trump administration overall. But in Idaho, things took a chaotic turn over the weekend. This video taken in the crowd showing a woman getting dragged out of a town hall on Saturday after organizers say she continued to interrupt the event. She's now arguing that her free speech rights were violated here. NBC's Camilla Bernal has more on the fallout.
We're getting the first reaction from an Idaho woman
There's an opportunity for you to stand up.
removed from a Republican-led town hall.
You're not smart enough to know.
First belittled by the moderator.
And look at this little girl is afraid to leave.
Before a confrontation breaks out. Kootenai County Sheriff Robert Norris asking the woman to leave or be arrested, then trying to forcibly remove her.
You out now! You up now. Let's go.
This man is assaulting me.
She's then pulled out of her seat by 3 unidentified men in black clothing, later identified as private security.
Show your badge.
Before being dragged onto the floor. Kootenai County Sheriff's Department says Norris was there, but the people who removed the woman were not his deputies. The security company, Lear Asset Management, did not respond to NBC's request for comment. The woman, identified as Teresa Borenpal, has run for the Idaho State House as a Democrat. Writing on Instagram, "I could never have imagined my right to free speech and my right to assemble could be stripped in such a violent way." Borenpal did not respond to NBC's request for further comment. In a statement after the video, the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee alleges that Borenpal, quote, relentlessly disrupted the event by verbally attacking the legislators. The committee's chairman, Brent Regan, saying the rules were clear.
We have security here and you'll be escorted out of the building.
Adding in comments to NBC News that, quote, none of this would have happened if she had been respectful of others. The incident just one in a series of protests across the country in response to the president's actions, like former Minnesota Vikings punter Chris Kluwe.
MAGA is profoundly corrupt, unmistakably anti-democracy, and most importantly, MAGA is explicitly a Nazi movement.
Arrested at a Huntington Beach, California City Council meeting last week over a plaque at the town's library that pays homage to the president.
I will now engage in the time-honored American tradition of peaceful civil disobedience.
Or in Wyoming, when a woman purposely referred to a male lawmaker as Madam Chairman to protest a bill about gender identity.
You can call me Mr. Chairman if you want.
Well, I cannot be compelled to use your preferred pronouns as you have all voted.
With Republicans at the federal level feeling the pressure too. From Wisconsin to Missouri, Oklahoma to Georgia, to a sit-in on Capitol Hill today. Federal employees furious over Elon Musk's cuts to the workforce through his DOGE agency. The big question now, are Republicans moved to push the president to slow down? Some directly targeted by these protests, like Georgia Congressman Rich McCormick and Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, suggesting to our team that the speed may be a bit much.
I'm all for trimming the government. I'm all for also doing it in a deliberate manner that allows people to adjust in their lifestyle.
What I'm hearing is that the federal employees have been treated with a level of disregard to their service and to their tenure.
Whether these acts of protest will change Mr. Trump's mind, however, remains an open question.
And Camilla joins us now with more. I mean, look, you played a lot of it in your piece there, but another thing, and you mentioned it as well, that has come up in town halls as people asking their lawmakers if they would be willing to subpoena Elon Musk. I want to play a little more from that town hall in Wisconsin, and then we'll talk right after.
Are you willing to use your subpoena power to say, Musk, come in here, stand in front of Congress, and answer some hard questions?
Certainly the discussion in and around DOGE and with the probationary moves that have already been done, they're going to have to be scrutinized at some point.
Camilla, you mentioned in your report there that we've heard lawmakers on Capitol Hill, Republicans, saying they're worried about the speed here, questioning about the way some of these layoffs have happened. But in terms of that idea of maybe subpoenaing Elon Musk, DOGE, is that getting any traction, if you will, with Republican lawmakers?
Yeah, I mean, you heard the congressman saying there are discussions, but there is a long road between discussions and actually getting things done in Washington, D.C. There are so many people around the country asking those questions and similar ones. And there are many lawmakers, particularly Republican ones, who seem to be dancing around those answers and being very careful as to how they respond. Democrats tried to subpoena Elon Musk back earlier this year, but those efforts were stopped by GOP lawmakers. So that shows you and gives you sort of an indication as to what's happening right now and how long this will take, which will likely be a while if it even happens. But of course, you never know what can happen in Washington, D.C., Ellison.
A lot to watch there for sure. Camilla Bernal, thank you so much. Here are some of the other stories happening out west that we're following tonight. The search for a missing Colorado man is intensifying after he was last seen in a national park nearly 2 weeks ago on February 13th. Jordan Marsters was spotted at Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park driving a white rental car with Texas license plates. The local sheriff there, as well as the National Park Service, they're asking the public to take a look at his photo and keep an eye out for him to try and help. Utah is about to become the first state to ban fluoride in its water system. The governor has yet to sign the bill, but it passed the state's legislature last Friday. Lawmakers say it's too expensive to put the controversial mineral in the water. That legislation comes after RFK Jr. was sworn in as the new health secretary. He's been skeptical about fluoride and fluoride in water. According to the CDC, about 2/3 of the U.S. population drinks water with fluoride. Some wild weather is moving through the Pacific Northwest today. A massive windstorm with gusts up to 60 miles an hour damaged areas in western Washington. Fallen trees closed a whole bunch of roads today, and at one point, over 100,000 people were without power. Still ahead tonight, you cannot spell artist without AI. But are things trending too far? The growing backlash over an AI art auction tonight in the future of everything. Let's take a quick look around the world. Ukraine's parliament voting to postpone elections until the war is over. That means President Zelensky, whose term originally expired last May, would stay in office. The parliament stressed the need for continuous leadership while the war is ongoing. All of this comes after criticism from both President Trump and Elon Musk for the country not holding elections. 3 American women were found dead over the weekend at a beach resort in Belize. While authorities are still investigating the cause of the death, first responders say the women had froth on their mouths, suggesting, in their view, possible drug overdoses. A UK woman says she faked personas to take the UK citizenship test for 13 people. The 61-year-old says she wore wigs to disguise herself as the applicants. Authorities say she was likely going after financial incentives. She's facing sentencing now in May. And the Vatican says Pope Francis, quote, rested well through the night. They say he is feeling slightly better as he continues to fight pneumonia in both lungs, but he still remains in critical condition. Hundreds of people gathered to pray for his recovery at St. Peter's Square. Before we go, it's time for the future of everything, right? The latest space tourism mission going off without a hitch. We've got reaction from the crew, well, at least most of them. We'll explain, so stay tuned. Tonight in the future of everything, we are heading back to space. But first, here's some headlines for you. Singapore's largest bank, DBS, is cutting 4,000 jobs over the next 3 years. They say it's because they're expecting AI to take over many tasks now done by humans. The cuts will impact nearly 10% of their workforce. The bank's outgoing CEO says it is the first time he's struggled to create jobs for people, but 1,000 new AI-related jobs are reportedly on the way. And a new album just dropped featuring more than 1,000 musicians, but the 12 tracks are almost completely silent. It's a protest against the UK government that's deciding if tech firms can use copyrighted materials to train AI. The silent album is called, quote, Is This What We Want?, as a warning on what could happen if the proposal goes through, according to those artists. The British government says no decision has been made yet. And earlier today, Blue Origin celebrating its 10th space tourism flight in the New Shepard rocket. The milestone in human space flight took off from West Texas, carrying a crew of 6 people. Today's launch also marks the 30th flight of that New Shepard rocket. Let's bring in NBC's Marissa Parra for more. Marissa, walk us through it. I mean, you know this stuff so well. How did today's mission go? And what, if anything, did the crew have to say?
Well, Ellison, it went off without a hitch, which is what we like to see. So we have 5 new astronauts, 1 who had a repeat mission. And this is space tourism at its finest. This is what New Shepard with Blue Origin specializes in. So you have anywhere between hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars being spent either by wealthy space tourists themselves or they get sponsored and funded. We have an array of professions that get up to space. We have people who are teachers, people who work in the finance industry. But either way, 6 people made suborbit. So this is about a 10-minute ride altogether. They spend just a couple of minutes in weightlessness, Ellison. But as you're about to hear, those couple of minutes are enough to change lives. Take a listen.
This is my small dream. I cry.
I thought I knew what home was. But when I was floating up there, and you see it right there, it's like you're home, and you get this new definition of what that means.
And it is always so striking to see the emotion from the people when they land back on Earth for the first time, especially when you think about the fact that they were only from the time of launch to the time of landing, Ellison, it really is only 10 minutes. They only experience weightlessness for less than a few minutes. But as you can tell, it really does impact them. And what I also find so striking is just how normal this is starting to feel. This is the 10th launch. We're talking about this really only started in 2021. That was the summer of 2021 was the first launch with New Shepard Blue Origin. And yet here we are talking about how normal it is. So it just goes to show how much can change in just a few short years, especially in the space world, Ellison.
Yeah, I mean, no kidding. Talk to us a little more about the crew members. 6 of them, as we said, but apparently there was one person who publicly, at least, was only identified by the first initial and a last name. Do we know why that was the case?
Ellison, that is such a good question, one that my producer Juliet and I were also kind of trying to get to the bottom of. It's a private company, so there tend to be a lot of mysteries, if you will. We actually don't even have the exact number of dollars spent by anyone that goes into space. And we don't know why Blue Origin chose not to disclose the name of this 6th member. And they technically don't have to tell us. We only know from the name on the patch, Wilson. The person's name, there was a Wilson in there, and that's really all that we know. And that is one of the difficulties of covering space, is when we have these private space companies, they don't even have to answer us necessarily, but we do have questions, and if we learn more, we will let you know, Ellison. But yeah, that was an interesting one. But we do know, again, 5 new astronauts, 1 repeat astronaut on this mission here.
Yeah, I mean, a reminder that we're talking about something different than NASA now, and so maybe some of the rules or the way we expect to get information is going to be different as well. I mean, This is a really busy week in terms of space launches, if we can kind of summarize it as that. What else are we expecting to see take to the skies as we close out February?
Right. So we had today's Blue Origin New Shepard launch. Tomorrow we expect a hearing. This is regarding Artemis. So this is the mission that NASA has to return humans to the moon. And then later tomorrow night, we are expecting a lunar lander to launch. And that will be the 3rd in roughly a month, Ellison. So then fast forward to Friday, we're expecting the possibility of SpaceX's 8th uncrewed test flight for Starship. Of course, an eventful 7th test flight that we talked about not that long ago. All of this is pending FAA approval. Elon Musk seems very confident that this will go off on Friday. We will see. We'll be here to tell you all about it if it does. And then over the weekend, we talked about how there were 2 other lunar landers that launched into space not that long ago. Well, one of them is expected to land on the moon on March 2nd. I want to point something out, though. The lunar lander tomorrow, and hopefully you and I can talk about this in more detail this time tomorrow, but the lunar lander tomorrow is IM-2. It's going to have drilling equipment to try to look beneath the surface of the moon's south pole, and tomorrow I'll tell you why. How's that for a cliffhanger?
We love it, Marissa Parra. We cannot wait. Thank you so much. We will see you and talk to you again later this week. Appreciate it. Finally tonight, a huge moment for the art world. The first major auction of art made using artificial intelligence, breaking barriers and drawing backlash. NBC's Brian Chung tells us where artists, in this case, draw the line between inspiration and theft.
It's an art auction unlike any other.
Generate an image of a pigeon wearing a suit.
For 258 years, Christie's has auctioned off everything from Picasso's to Princess Diana's dresses. But for the first time, they're now auctioning off an entire collection of pieces made using artificial intelligence.
If it just gets people thinking about what creativity means within computers and AI, I think that's a great conversation to start.
Artist Alexander Reben is one of the artists featured in the augmented intelligence auction. Reben's work, a living, breathing canvas, painted by an AI-powered robot that adds a square inch of paint every time a bid is placed on the piece.
What is the meaning of this work?
Well, that's a interesting question. I don't want to put a particular meaning on it because I feel like the type of art I make allows reflection for what people want to take away from it. So I don't know exactly what it's going to be.
The piece, which could sell for upwards of $1.7 million, is one of more than 30 pieces being sold as part of Christie's AI sale.
Can you do a little dance for me?
I love to. Dancing is such a beautiful way to express creativity.
While pieces like this are giving some artists the opportunity of a lifetime, some critics say the AI tools being used to train them are using copyrighted material without permission.
They're built off of artists' work without consent, credit, or compensation, which does not constitute fair use, and it's dramatically affecting our jobs and livelihoods.
Concept artist and illustrator Reed Southen is one of the artists behind a letter calling on Christie's to cancel the auction. More than 6,000 artists signed the letter.
We believe in the auction, around a third of the artworks use these types of unethical models. And so with the open letter specifically, we're asking Christie's to not support or condone that sort of thing.
Christie's kicked off that auction anyway on February 20th, telling the public they welcome the debate it started.
Artists have been influenced by other artists for centuries. We're looking at something new and something interesting that will forever change the scope of art.
Christie's director of digital art, Nicole Sales-Giles, says the auction house is merely meeting a growing demand for AI art. In 2018, they sold an AI-generated portrait by a French art collective for $432,000.
How do you make sure that in an auction like this, where there's so much technology, that you're not accidentally selling something that is actually stealing from someone else?
Yeah, I mean, all the artists in this sale, we are very, very in close contact with. We know exactly how they're using AI in their practice, what they're doing and how they're using it. But a lot of it is their own training data.
Southen says it's not clear to him that Christie's did enough to make sure the featured AI pieces didn't train themselves on other artists' work without permission.
I think that what they're doing is sort of building this auction on the honor system and not really doing their due diligence on these things because there's money to be made.
Artists like Reben embrace the debate.
So painters were afraid of the camera when it came out because they thought it would do things like replace landscape painting. But now a lot of painters actually paint from pictures they take. I think AI is going to help people in that way. It's going to help them come up with new ideas, help them iterate in their imagination, and maybe they'll take that back to traditional things.
So inspiration or infringement for AI art, it's in the eye of the beholder. Brian Chung, NBC News.
That does it for us tonight. I'm Ellison Barber. We'll see you tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.